Welcome to the Coptimizer Podcast, a platform dedicated to uncuffing your true potential in public safety. We're here to provide you with valuable tips and insights that will help you optimize your life and career. I'm retired Chief Patrick Flannelly, and I'm honored to be your guide and coach on this journey. Here, I'll share the latest insights and strategies to help you survive and thrive in the demanding world of public safety. Our noble duty is to protect and serve. We embody the role of peacemakers in our communities. However, this profession's immense physical and mental demands come with a price. If we fail to take a proactive approach for our well-being and lead ourselves first, then the stress from the job can and will lead to poor health outcomes. We have all seen it play out. Not only does this impact our professional and personal lives, but it also affects our ability to fulfill this sacred duty. Like many of you, my journey has been filled with tremendous challenges, with highs and lows. However, through creativity, experience, and a positive attitude, I successfully managed over 30 years in law enforcement, emerging healthy and happy. Now, I am driven to share what I've learned to show you that the path is not all doom and gloom. There is hope and a profound purpose in serving your community, and I'm here to show you that it does not have to come at the cost of your health and well-being. Join us as we explore cutting-edge research, interview top experts, and share inspiring stories of transformation. Whether on duty or off, it's time to optimize your potential and live your best life. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. This is the Coptimizer Podcast. Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer Podcast. Again, super excited about our guest this week. We're going to learn a lot today, and I just can't wait to jump in. But today we have Swope, and he is, and you know, I've been saying Swope in my head ever since we had this conversation, and the thought just jumped. You know, it might be Swope. Am I pronouncing Swoop or Swope? Which is it?
It's Swope.
See what happens? See where the mind can take you?
I've been called worse than that, though.
I'm sure. Uh, normally I do a whole segment on the bio, and I'm just gonna just touch just real briefly on this because if I were to read the resume of Ross Swope, we would be here for 90 minutes, just me talking about all his accomplishments, and then we would probably need some more time. But Ross rose through the ranks of the Metro Police Department in D.C., started as a uniformed patrolman and worked his way up through the ranks, just not only in uniform, but in investigative positions, and retired as a deputy chief, the command of over 400. And here's where we really start to see probably why, right? Along the way, he earned 3 master's degrees, not just one, but 3, from Johns Hopkins, the University of Cambridge in the UK. He was selected as only one of 2 police officers in the US in 1999 to be awarded as a Fulbright Scholar, where he spent almost a year in the UK working with Scotland Yard. So we have a Sherlock Holmes here with us. He's been published over 35 times, both practitioner and academic-based journals on police topics. He is known nationally and internationally for his expertise. He's been an adjunct professor at both Johns Hopkins, where he's taught ethics, I think we're going to touch mostly on today, and at American University. He's traveled internationally. He's been requested around the world. He's received the Medal of Valor for the highest award for courage, and the Police Medal of Merit. And, if that wasn't enough, he decided he wanted to be the chief of police for the Supreme Court of the United States for 14 years. And there he's responsible for the protection and security of the Chief Justice and the associate justices, dignitaries, VIPs, over 300,000 visitors to the court each year, which I thought that was really curious. I didn't realize we had that many people that would come through and visit the Supreme Court itself. I don't know why I'm surprised by that, but maybe it's just my time in courtrooms locally where nobody seems to come in. Maybe just we're a little bit different scale. And yeah, I could just keep going, but over 43 years of experience, and I am just so honored to have you on the show, and I can't wait to jump in. That's a long way of saying good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm excellent, and it's my honor and pleasure to be here with you, Patrick, and be part of your podcast.
Well, so you've written what I think it's like 12 books. Is it 12?
No, I've only written one book. I've
Or is
published a lot on police topics, nationally and internationally, and as you said, in academic and practitioner journals, and they're all well received. And I find out that much of my work is being used at police academies and also at universities.
well, that's got to be pretty cool to know that all your hard work and effort is being passed on and used. That's gotta leave at least a warm feeling in your heart.
It does leave a warm feeling. I mean, when I was attending the IACP conferences, I'd walk around in the exhibit area. You'd have a name tag on, and I'd be walking around, and somebody would come up and say, "Are you Ross Swope?" And I said, "Well, yeah." Just, well, we use your material in our police academy from some of your articles. And then a professor would come up and say, "Oh, that piece you did on statistics, I use it in my class in the university." So I was just shocked, but I was very flattered that people are finding value in what I have to say. It keeps me motivated and keeps me writing.
Well, this is the Coptimizer podcast, and it's a play on words, cop optimization. And if I had to, I've said this many times, but we can focus on a lot of things in policing to try to make it better, but nothing is more important than the 6 inches between our ears. Some call it 5 inches. I'll just say we're big brain cops, so we've got 6 inches to work with. But I think your work is just a perfect example of what is possible. I think when we put our minds to professional development, self-improvement, and I think you just truly embody the spirit of a continuous lifelong learner. And that is so fascinating. But we had a great conversation on our pre-podcast interview about a month ago, and um, I think that might be a great way to kick it off because when you started your career, that wasn't necessarily looked at as a positive thing, right, college boy? Is that
Uh, not really, not really. But I can start out. I'll start at the beginning. You just say when.
Yeah, start at the beginning because that when you came in, you were a college graduate, and maybe just talk a little bit about your your growing up, your family influence. Your dad was a Metro DC police officer, and I think that's maybe where it all started. Let's just jump in there.
All right. So my dad was drafted into the Army. He got out of the Army and went back to his job he had. The job that he had said, "Sorry, son, it's filled." So in 1947, he joined the DC police and had a career there. Um, I went to college and graduated from the University of Maryland. And during my upbringing, I was surrounded by great men, not famous, but great men, because there was a solidarity there. And we socialized with cops, and that's what I knew. And I admired them, especially admired my father. So when I graduated from the University of Maryland, I had worked my way through college as a draftsman. And I didn't like sitting in an office, and I wanted to do something different and be like the men that mentored and I was around my whole life. So I applied to the DC police. I told my mother that, and she cried. I was the first person in our family to graduate from college, and here I was going into a profession that did not require that. And she was worried about the danger and the injuries because uh, my father had been injured seriously many times, and she didn't want that happen to me. But I had to follow my own path. So in 1973, I raised my right hand and swore an allegiance to the Constitution and protect and serve. Went through the academy, uh, did well there, was the top of my class. So I got to choose the district I was going to. So I chose the third district, which was the diciest, spiciest place in DC. The smallest police district, but everything was focused there, all vice, high crime, low socioeconomic neighborhoods. And I wanted to learn, and the way that I wanted to learn was fast. And there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot to learn. So I figured if I go there, I can learn as much there in 1 year as, say, other districts in the city. It would take 2 years, and in the county, it would take 5 years. In some rural areas, you may never learn these things.
Yeah.
So I went there. I go into roll call. There's a salty old sergeant there. Looks at me. What are you doing here, college boy? Uh, that was my initiation into DC police. Back then, the department was 5,000 men and women strong. I was one of 10 that had a college degree.
That crazy. Gosh.
Really, so he put on everything on me. Threw me out on the foot beat by myself. Back then, there was no portable radios. We used call boxes. Initiation by fire, that's where I went. Walking a foot beat by myself in a very dangerous place. And all we had was call boxes. I'm good with that. I was trained, and that was my initiation. And that's where I started learning.
Yeah. I remember when I was in the Air Force, yeah, my first, like, we used to call them guard mounts, but yeah, I was 19 at the time, but I probably looked closer to 14. Not a hair on my chin.
Yeah.
I had this crusty old sergeant look at me. He's like, how old are you? I'm like, I'm 19, feeling offended. God damn, I got underwear that's older than you. But that's yeah, yeah, just a couple things in there I wanted to touch on. So choosing the busiest district, wanting to go where the action is, yeah, that's I worked with a lot of people that were just like that, but you also see people that go the opposite direction. And I was always curious about that. I was always curious as to why, what would drive someone to want to be a police officer, but then not be interested in working in the areas where all the police work is, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it seemed counterintuitive to me, but um yeah, I didn't mind, this. I remember reading too in your book, you were working rotating shifts. You were working afternoons, nights, and days. You had, I think you said Tuesdays and Wednesdays off. Maybe it was Wednesday, Thursdays. Um, this was in most young officers today are going into agencies that work 12-hour shifts, or they're working 410s. They have set days off. They've got pretty good schedules right from Jump Street, and it wasn't like it back then. And I was I didn't want to have Friday and Saturday night off. That's when all the action was. I was like, why would I want to take the busiest nights of the week off? So like, can I have what were the slowest nights? Monday night, Tuesday night. And when you're a rookie, nobody, no one's going to argue with you about wanting those days off.
It was different. The schedule was a tough schedule for me. I had just gotten out of college. I was still socializing with my college friends. As you said, I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, but we changed every 2 weeks. 2 weeks of day work, 2 weeks of evenings, and 2 weeks of midnights. But with Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, I had short changes. A short change would be I would work day work on a Saturday. It would change into Sunday. Sunday started at 11:30 Saturday night for Sunday. So I'd get off
Oh,
at 3 o'clock and have to be back at 11:30. That's a short change.
isn't that crazy? And I was teaching I was teaching a wellness class just a couple months ago at the Transform conference, and Chief Joe Monroe in Lexington, Kentucky puts on a great conference. But I thought schedules like that were gone. I thought they were long gone. And I talked with a deputy on a break, and he said, "Hey," he asked me if I had any advice to how to talk to a sheriff about the dangers of having 2 week shifts. They were rotating their shifts still every 2 weeks, from days to afternoons to nights. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know anyone did that anymore. I thought we figured that out like 25, 30 years ago. Hey, that's not a good way to drive good performance in your people.
No.
Besides the fact that you might kill them early, or you're going to kill them early, you're probably going to ask yourself for a lot of problems with behavior and performance-based issues because your people are tired all the time.
Well, I didn't experience tiredness on the short chains because I went to from day work to midnights on a Saturday night, and things were rolling all the time. So as far as fatigue and being sleepy, that was not in the mix. Um, Eventually, it hits you maybe at 5 o'clock in the morning, but when you went there, it rocked and rolled on them short changes. So it was very busy the whole time there, and it was hard sleeping on midnights, getting home in the morning, but I drank it in. I I drank the Kool-Aid. I love that place. I got a lot of intrinsic rewards from it, and I think I accomplished a lot in my career. And that's where it started.
Well, it's not a profession, generally speaking. It's a lot better now than it was, but depending on what state you're in, what department you're in, you may not get rich from being a police officer, but you can reap the rewards of the job of knowing that you can have impacts on lives that will, that can potentially impact generations of families. So that's always a cool thing. It's a great thing to take away, and you can have a lot of fun in the process.
You can. And um, yes, you can impact other people. You're able to impact, at least I felt that I was able to impact the men and women that worked under my charge, my peers, and my superiors. But I also made a very strong connection in the communities I worked with. Low socioeconomic neighborhoods. I deliberately went out there and pursued connections with the folks that I was there to protect and serve. And those connections served me well.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the information business, right? I mean, policing is all about information. It's who's going to share what with you and at what point in the investigative process. Uh, if you don't, the irony is that I'm sitting here looking out my window, and my neighbors are having their house painted, and I've always used this analogy of a ladder, and I'm watching them. They've got this gigantic two-story ladder all the way up to the top of the roof, and I used to say, if you're working in an area where nobody wants to talk to the police or nobody wants to share information with the police, every invest that you work, you're starting on the bottom rung, and you just got to work your way up, and it'll take you time. But if you work in an area where people trust you, where they like you, where you've developed good relationships, then it's like you can take an elevator to the top and you can get right to the good stuff. And that's it wasn't something that I recognized intuitively. I was lucky. I had good FTOs. I had good mentors that, kind of slapped the ego out of me a little bit, or certainly put me in check when I felt like I knew I got too big for my britches. But yeah, I know that, and that's something that you've discussed and you talk about in your books as well, or in your book, and I know some of your publications.
Well, you talked about something that continued learning. And even as I advanced, I learned things. I learned things from watching other people. I learned things from subordinates. So I talked to you about how important it was for me to make the connections in the community. And I did that. So when I finished my papers in the morning, as whatever rank I was at, say captain, and I'd go out and I'd patrol and I'd see people sitting on the porch. I'd park my car, go over and talk to them, make connections. You know, the old people, single family parents, they'd be sitting around, walking around. I get out and walk and introduce myself, and they would say, "We've never seen a white shirt here before." A white shirt meaning that lieutenants and above wore white shirts. And here I was a captain or a deputy chief, and they were just shocked, and I give out my card. Well, I made connections with them, but it was later on in my career that I recognized that I was missing something there. So there was a sergeant that worked for me when I was in uniform, when running a uniform sector, Sergeant Jeff Hoop. What a fine man he was. So I made deputy chief and took over homicide division. Well, lo and behold, from time to time, Sergeant Jeff Hoop would show up and talk to some of the officials under me. Jeff Hoop made a connection, but he asked questions, which I didn't do. He talked to people. He had the same relationship with them that I did, but he'd ask them about open homicides. And I was down there and I saw firsthand, he closed 5 cases just from talking to people. He'd ask them questions. He had a relationship and he built it. I didn't realize that till later on. So continued learning, but this is a strong connection. You make the connection and then you can ask questions and then you get answers and then things happen. And I still remember him and what a fine work he did. And I didn't know that till later on in my career, but it's constant learning. And that's an important connection that that has to be stressed with police officers, police officials, that things can be built better. And those connections are critical in our operations to protect and serve.
Yeah, that's so important. And I was one of those people, and when I was in my young, as a young street officer, uh, I didn't have time for that, right? I was busy in my mind. I didn't have time for that. And it wasn't until later where I recognized, some of these lessons that you're talking about, like, and I'm a huge proponent of technology. I love the efficiencies that we can gain from technology. I love all the things that they can do for us, and I think we need to embrace it, lean into it. But I don't think that it should ever come at the cost of diminishing relationships that we have with the people on your beat, right? And knowing who's on your beat, knowing what's going on, because that's where it's at. I mean, sure, there's some great technology out there that might be able to help you solve some cases, DNA, other stuff like that. That you may not need people to talk to you, but you're sure going to miss a lot if you're not getting the story from the street.
It's the patrol officers on their beat that are the subject matter experts where they work. And I would go to them all the time and talk to them. And it's an important aspect that when you're on there, you see things and they register in your mind. So you can be very proactive if you're the expert on your beat. You see things that nobody else would see. For an example, so there's a dry cleaner on your beat. They close at 6 o'clock on Saturday, every Saturday. So I would ride by there at 8 o'clock and see movement inside there. I wouldn't think of anything of it because I don't know they close at 6. Other people wouldn't know they close at 6, but that beat officer does, and he sees movement in there at 8 o'clock. He's going to be proactive. He sees something that is an anomaly and he addresses it. Those are things, those minor anomalies that could indicate criminal activity or social disorder or physical disorder, that subject matter expert on the beat is so important. I wouldn't recognize that he does and action is taken. Crimes are prevented, people are safer, the public feels like they're being serviced properly.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And I'll 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 give a little quick shout out to another, I think, fabulous author and someone I think that's done a lot of great work and really, and maybe you know him or you're familiar with him, but Gavin De Becker, he wrote a book called The Gift of Fear. And I would just I read that for a completely different reason than police work, but there were several examples of police work used in that book. And from that point forward, it became an automatic read for any recruit officer that I got. I made him read that book. But he talked about in that example that you just gave that police trusting your intuition, that sixth sense. The patrol officer, if they're paying attention, they they will learn intuitively and proactively what belongs, what doesn't belong. And it's this process when the human mind detects something that's out of place, it will rise from your subconscious to your conscious mind. And then there is a moment there where you make a decision about whether you're going to continue to pursue it or whether you're going to dismiss it. And we do this thousands of times a day, but for the police officer, it might be, hey, um, I've driven by this, like you're saying, that business, 100 times. I know it closes at 6. I saw activity in there. It's 8 o'clock at night. Now here's the important part where for the police officer that recognizes that, lets that level of intuition capture his attention, then take a moment to actually think about it. Like, okay, well, why would somebody be in there at 8 o'clock? Could it be ownership? Or is there something more nefarious going on? Is there a burglary in progress? Um, the the proactive officer is not going to go into a state of dismissal and denial right away. They're going to act on that intuition. They're going to go back, maybe drive around the block, maybe maybe get out of their car, take a closer look, and continue to investigate. What can get a lot of police officers in trouble is we recognize, oh man, that could be work. So that could mean I could be really busy for the next hour or so. So maybe I'll just keep going. So it's probably nothing. It's probably just the owner. They're probably just working late. And, of course, then the next day you find out there was a burglary in the business or something like that. Um, I don't mean to take us down a whole different path, but that's what it reminded me of. Because patrol officers are, that is where everything begins at the street, right?
So I have a good example of that. And I wrote about this police officer, pursuit of excellence. And when I was a district commander, uh, it was the evening shift. Evening shift gets off at 11:15, 11:30. It's pouring down raining. It's cold. The wind is blowing. So at 10:55, a call goes out. Check for the woman screaming for help. So a 10-4 car is dispatched. 10-4 car goes up there, rolls through the alley. On one side's the woods, the other side's sort of residential, but there's a big wooded area on the left side. So they roll their window down, put the spotlight on, and cruise slowly by. They don't see anything. They don't get out of their car. It's pouring down, raining, the wind is blowing, and they clear the assignment as nothing found. 30 seconds later, a 1099 unit, an officer by himself pulls up there. It's check off time. Okay. Everybody's getting ready to check off. It's 10 minutes after 11 p.m. Check off times in 5 minutes, pouring down, raining, the wind is blowing, and it's cold. This single officer drives up there, gets his flashlight, gets out of the car, walks into the woods, tells the dispatcher, hold me here. He gave his location, hold me here for 5. He gets out, goes into the woods. He don't take 20 yards in there and hears a muffled groan. He goes his flashlight over there and finds a man on top of a woman with their clothes stripped off.
Wow.
He made the arrest. It was a closed case. I don't know whether that woman would have Maybe she was going to get raped, but she might have been killed. And he saved that life because he was pursuing excellence. And that's the type of police I want to develop and be there to do those things. Two other officers, and I never said a word to them. They was humiliated and embarrassed. But this officer, I wrote him up for a big commendation. So that's pursuit of excellence. That's what I strove to do my whole career. And also, I want others to do that. And I have worked with thousands of them just like him.
Well, I said I wasn't going to read all your commendations, but so I think what we're talking about there is a perfect example of you leading by example. Because I was reading your bio. I think it was 15 official accommodation letters from commanding officers, Medal of Merit, Medal of Valor, letters of commendation from your mayor, commendation from the director of the FBI, 43 crime reduction awards, 5 commendations from the chief. Yeah, I mean, so the example that you're doing and by rewarding an officer for going above and beyond, well, we could say that, right? Above and beyond, but or is it really just a matter of them taking the time to care about, what the potential for the problem is? And that goes back to that process of denial that I just talked about, right? It's easy to deny that there might be a problem and move on because, right? Probably 999 times out of 1,000, that might not have been a problem, but it's the one, right? It's the one that where you that officer just made a huge impact and probably saved that woman's life. You know, not to mention, prevented further victimization. That's crazy.
I have many examples of how officers went above and beyond. And as you said, 99 times out of 100, it's not going to be anything but that one time. So I had an officer who responded to a robbery, force, and violence. So the older gentleman was beat up and robbed. That's a robbery, force, and violence. So he took the information and the officer queried him on what was stolen. He said, they got my wallet and they beat me. But the worst thing was I had a winning lottery ticket for $25,000 in my wallet that I hadn't cashed in yet. He says, well, and how do you identify it? I used my birthday. What did the officer do? He took the report and was out of service for a little bit. What did he do? He went to the lottery board, told them, here's a number for a $25,000 ticket that somebody's going to come in here and cash. Call me if anybody shows up on my cell phone. He submitted a report. Everything's good. 2 days later, I was in roll call with them when he gets a call at the lottery board and said, there's a man here trying to cash that ticket. He took off out of there, took some detectives with me. He went to the lottery board and locked the guy up for receiving stolen property, and then had a lineup. And then the complainant, the older man, identified him as the man that beat him in robbery. So those are the things, those little nuances, the effort that men and women put forth every day that nobody hears stories about. But something like that, I mean, it happens every day all across the nation. People using their experience and education and skills to do things like that for the public.
Yeah, that's such a cool story. I'll give you another example, and this was again early in my career. I had one of those calls where it was a check well-being. Um, a neighbor had called in. He had his next door neighbor was an elderly male subject, and there was a couple newspapers in the driveway, and the mailbox was filling up, and the the neighbor just said that's just unusual. He normally would tell me if he's going out of town. He didn't really have any family or anything, so he's just like I'm just worried about him. So me and another officer got there. We we checked the perimeter, we checked the doors, everything's locked, and couldn't get in, couldn't see in, didn't see anything that was disturbed or out of place. We didn't have a key holder or anyone that we could call to go in, but I just didn't feel right. I didn't want to leave. I felt like I just had this feeling like something's just not right. And so it was literally one of those things where I had my partner, get down on all fours so I could stand on his back and get up and look into a bathroom window. And it turned out to be a bathroom window. I didn't know it at the time, but I was looking through a bathroom and shining my flashlight in through the bathroom and out into the hall. I saw 2 feet, bare feet, laying in the hallway. And so we went around, kicked the door in, went in, and found the gentleman. And he had fallen, couldn't get up, was too weak to get up, had been there for over 24 hours, was dehydrated. So, we got medics there and took care of him. But, it was just kind of one of those things where we were, that really kind of haunted me because we were so close to leaving. And had we left and not taken that one last look, that guy most likely would have died in his house. And I don't know if I would have even known it. Like at some point at a later time, and maybe someone would have said, "Hey, we called the police on this day," and then I would have had to answer the fact, "Well, why didn't you notice it?" Right? And I did everything right. It wasn't like I did anything wrong, but yeah, it's just those little things like that stick with you, and that, um, yeah, they can really impact you, the way you think about the job, like the thoroughness and what you're going to do. And I say all that because I also see there in policing today, police officers, depending on where you work, right, can be very busy. You can run call to call, call to call, call to call, and a lot of it can be pretty mundane stuff that's not, you're not going to solve that robbery or save a life like that. But the challenge is like how do you keep that, I guess, that passion for making sure that you're doing everything that you can to make a difference every day through all of the mundane work. And
So my experience is this, is that is it's incumbent upon sergeants, lieutenants, and corporals to create a ethical culture where that is the norm and not the exception. And that is done, in my experience, and I've written about this, and that's basically the ethical culture that the sergeants, lieutenants, and corporals hold those men and women under their charge accountable for ethical performance, top performance. Now, how do they do this? They're the last folks to touch the mail. They control the culture in their squad, their section, their sector, their district. They control that. You can have all the edicts from the top as far as ethical performance of duty, directives, general orders, policies, and procedures. But if they're not focused and enforced by sergeants, lieutenants, and corporals, then it doesn't make any difference what's said at the top. So they create a culture of high performance, ethics-based policing. And they do this by recognizing and rewarding all the time those folks that do exceptional work. And the few slaps, vous savez slap? Slap. Not sounds like a plan, slap, stupid, lazy ass police. Okay. That they deal with those small, minute group of people that are slaps, and they hold them accountable, and there's consequences. So everybody in that squad, section, sector, district sees, damn, I don't want to be like them. I want to be like them. They see what ethical performance results in: recognitions, rewards, intrinsic rewards, commendations, all these things. They want to be like them. They see personally and firsthand how these officers leave their tour of duty in the evening happy because they have done something that affected somebody else. So it's not a big challenge to institute this ethics-based policing if you just do the right thing as a sergeant, corporal, or lieutenant. You change the culture there to where it's high performance, high ethical performance. The slaps diminish, the high performers increase significantly, and all of a sudden, the community's engaged. They're engaging them. And these officers, and I was one of them. I was one of the officers, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. When I left work, I don't care how many hours I'd put in, I felt good. I did something, I accomplished something. Every day was my goal, whether it was with my subordinates or peers or with the community. I put forth effort and I was rewarded. And I'm still being rewarded by the memories I had of all the things that I did for people and they appreciated it and I changed things. So that's my mantra, my ilk. That's what I'm telling people about. It's the culture. It's, will reduce or eliminate the use of excessive force and misconduct. It works. It's been tested. LAPD did it. A lot of areas around here, I've spoken about it and addressed, and it's changed operations significantly to be more effective.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really, I think at the core what you're talking about too, right, is what I don't know if you're calling, if it's training or if it's just maybe a better way is the driving the culture, right? It's where you are teaching the rewards and the value of the intrinsic motivators, not the extrinsic. Um, and I guess it's interesting if you think about generations of police right now, because the older salty officers today are always think, oh, the young guys don't appreciate how good they have it. They don't they don't recognize like everything that we had to walk uphill to work both days, like. But at the end of it, it really is what you're doing the work for the reward of doing the right thing brings, not because, oh, well, I'm going to get a certificate to hang on my wall or I'm going to get a bonus in my paycheck, but I get to go home knowing that I did the right thing. And I think in order to create that culture, when what you're talking about is rewarding and demonstrating by example what is good behavior, what's good police work, and what's not. And I bring that up because one of the things that we talked about, and I wanted to touch on, particularly when it comes to ethics and ethics-based policing, is a comment that you made when we were having our pre-podcast, where you were like the right now, and it's not new today, right? When we look at things like George Floyd and others, those tend to be symptoms, or those are maybe at the point where a problem finally reveals itself, but the symptoms most likely have been there for a while, where you have the actions of a few that are threatening the profession as a whole. And in today's, in the way that social media works and the way that media in general works, maybe 20-25 years ago these things would be isolated, but now a police officer does, it could be, right, I think we talked about this, right, that it could be the chief of police from Uvalde, a 6-person police department. you know um, Maybe he doesn't perform like to expectations, and now the whole world is judging every police officer based on that. So, what are your thoughts on just on the profession in terms of how, are we doing a good job, do you think, addressing the core issues? Or I don't know, I don't even know what I'm trying to ask there, but maybe just your thoughts on that in general.
Uh, I, I agree with you. And I agree with you in this way is that they have a culture that is not the best culture. And nothing severe has ever happened. So the chief of police or the top executives say, well, I don't need to institute that because nothing's ever happened here. Well, in a lot of departments, there's a long distance between roll calls and the chief of police. Chief of police has got his guidelines and things, but the culture in that particular squad or section is not so good. But nothing really major ever happens. So no steps are taken to remediate anything because no big press story is broken, nothing severe has happened. But there is men and women, perhaps, in that unit that overstep their bounds from time to time, but it doesn't blow up into a major incident. So nothing's done about it, and it goes on, and maybe in 10 years nothing happens, maybe in 15 years nothing happens, maybe tomorrow something does happen. It's there. Um, two
In middle,
officers two officers respond to a location with a woman inside a house, and she's got a butcher knife, and she's an MO. She's mentally disturbed. The officers are called there because neighbors are concerned. The woman comes to the window. She's got a butcher knife. They shoot and kill her. That's not right. That's not good. Uh, had ethical policing been in effect and you were able to train people and show them things, but it's in a culture where it's freewheeling because it hasn't been an issue, but then it is. And all of a sudden it goes nuclear and officers are arrested and it's bad news.
yeah,
Real bad.
that was a bad case. I remember that.
Yes, I don't want to mention anything, but that's a real case.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember the first time I saw that, it was yeah, it was like one of those whoa, lean back in your chair moments. Um, you know, well, let's just use that as an example because I think that's it. Because there's a lot of things you can touch on with that. It for the person that doesn't know anything about policing, I think if you show that video to 100 people, 90 of them right off the bat are going to be like, wow, you know, why the officer do that? If you show that to 100 police officers, I think 90 of them will have the same reaction. But then I think the problem from there is instead of being honest with themselves about, is this a case of poor performance and unnecessary use of force or an unnecessary escalation of the type of force, they go into the justification mode. Like, oh, well, I could see why maybe he did that. She was armed. And then it's this process of justifying small things in order to justify the big thing. And I've talked about this previously, but I think, you know, in the end, it's cops are loath to be critical of other cops, and then that puts everything on the supervisors. And then if the supervisors don't have the courage to do the right thing, then it pushes it up to the next level of management. And if they don't have the courage to do the right thing, it's going to push it all the way to the chief's office. And if they don't have the courage to do the right thing, then that's what you wind up with. You know, you wind up with shootings that you shouldn't have. And, you know, where I like to look at incidents like that and kind of trace it and go backwards from that moment. And just try to like you would in, I guess, break it down like in any hot wash or after action review. Um, what were the points of failure that led up to that moment where somebody made that decision? Was it an individual failure? Was it a failure on the agency to train properly? Was it a failure on the supervisors to hold people accountable to a standard that led to that? Yeah, there's so much you can dig into on just on that one case alone.
I understand. And my take is this. Um, Judgment and discretion. That's what we do. It's judgment and discretion. And in a culture where ethics is of prime importance and it is reinforced every day, judgment and discretion is exercised much better, much more effectively, and the right way. That was judgment and discretion on those two officers' part. Had they been in a culture, Probably, maybe, I don't know, but it would have contributed to better decision making and better judgment in cases like that. One. The second part is if you're an official and you're in ethics-based policing, you see the value of that and you constantly drill it, reinforce it, and talk about it by words and deeds, then there's trust built between the official and their subordinates. Now, I built a lot of trust. When I was on the scene, everything was good, but I conducted investigations my whole career. Whether it was administrative or criminal, I can conduct an investigation. But the thing is, I always was fair and straightforward. And sometimes the officers was justified and sometimes they weren't. But when they were, I put the hammer down and did the right thing. And so my first incident of use of excessive force that I was blatantly exposed to, I had worked drugs for a long time. I was a newly promoted lieutenant in the district. The district commander said, take some people and go up there and rattle that open air drug market. So we did some buy busts and foot chases were involved, and we were just dealing with street dealers then because it was disrupting the neighborhood significantly. So there was a foot chase involved. The officer brings the suspect back. He's handcuffed behind his back. He's coming up to where we're staged. Sergeant goes up and punches him in the mouth. This is 1982. I didn't like that. That wasn't going to work for me. I never was into excessive force and unnecessary force, but punching a suspect in the mouth while he's handcuffed is not going to work. So we went back to the station. I closed it down, started taking statements. The man that was arrested was punched in the mouth, didn't want to complain. I got no issues with it. I was dealing drugs. I chased. He got punched in the mouth. No harm, no foul. There's no complaining except me. This is 1982. The sergeant's got rabbis, meaning he's got friends in very high places. I don't.
Yeah.
But it's risky for me. I'm a newly promoted lieutenant. There's no complaint, and I'm moving forward with a major investigation for this. I moved forward with it. I put it forward. My district commander concurred. It went all the way up. He got 30 walk days. So that was sort of got me going. I had a reputation henceforth, and don't do stuff like that. It's not right. Don't do that type of activity. Don't behave like that. Don't use excessive force. Don't use unnecessary force because it's not the right thing to do. So that's one side. The other side is this. When I was night hawking, which means I was in charge of the whole department on evenings, I get a call, switch the radio channel to the 5th District. I did, and they had a car pursuit where the police was pursuing a car. The car hit a pole. He wrecked and died. At that time, you can't pursue anybody for traffic. You can only pursue them if there's a threat of death or serious bodily harm. So I go up there. The car's wrecked. There's a couple lieutenants up there, watch commanders. I'm the Nighthawk. I'm in charge of the department. So what happened? He says, well, he was involved in an illegal pursuit. Okay. And illegal pursuit, he chased a car. The guy hit a pole. He's dead. I said, well, where's the officer? He says, he's over there, sitting on the curb. That's not right. So I get him, come on up here and get in my car. Tell me what happened. This is what happened. I received a call over the radio for a sexual assault in progress. Code 1. I expedite down there. I pull up on the scene of the apartment. A woman comes running out with a house dress that's half ripped off. There's a man that runs out behind her. She starts screaming and pointing at him. That's him. I yell for him to stop. He doesn't stop. He gets in his car and gets off and takes off, and I pursue him. He cracks up the car and dies. That's what happened. I said, okay. So I go back to lieutenants. This is a illegal pursuit. Yes. Well, how is it? Because the woman, when we interviewed her, said it was just a domestic and there was no rape involved. I said, oh. So I go down that night, right away, go down and pull the 911 tapes, get the conversation, pull the radio tapes, get the conversation. I go back up to the 5th District where the 2 lieutenants are before checkoff and said, I'll be submitting a statement for your investigation tomorrow night. I wrote my statement before I got off that morning. That officer pulled on the scene. He had sufficient probable cause right then and there to arrest that man based on the facts and circumstances presented to him. And if he had not pursued him, I probably would have charged him with neglected duty and cowardice in the line. He was 100% right. I wrote my whole statement. It's not what you find out after the fact, it's what you find out before the fact. And I went to bat for him because it was the right thing to do. So when I'm doing investigations, it's straight up. People trusted me. They knew I was going to do the right thing, whether it was bad or whether it was good. And that officer came up a year later and said, Chief, if you hadn't have been there that night, I would not be working as a police officer right now. And I may even have been in jail. And I wanted to let you know that's what you did for me. I said, look, I did the right thing. You did the right thing. All is good. So those are in type of investigations. And I agree with you. There's good ones and bad ones and then go either way. But if you're honest and ethics based, it works out for everybody.
Yeah, so those are, I mean, those are pretty those are great examples. And for people, for young officers that are looking to move into leadership positions, it's easy to think about what you might do in those situations. It's another thing to actually have to do it when you're the one that's responsible. And two perfect examples of the courage and having the moral courage to do the right thing when it might not be the popular thing. In the first case, an officer, it's the officer was clearly wrong, punching somebody while they're handcuffed. Um, and then in the second case, the concern going the opposite direction. I find they're both interesting cases because inside of policing, and this is again, I still think to this day we still struggle with it as a profession, trying to create an environment where we're just acting on the information that we know in the moment and judging officers based on did they do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons versus what might be the outcomes of decisions if it becomes unpopular. Like, oh man, people might not like this decision, therefore I change my decision, not having the moral courage to do what's right. Yeah, and it's those are the things that can I think really really have a negative impact on the culture of an agency, but also on the health of individuals when they don't feel like they have the support of their organization to make the tough decision, or they need to make a tough decision in the organization. Um, oh yeah. Anyway, does that make sense?
It does. You have to have it. I agree.
I tell people this a lot. It's like, I mean, people beg to get promoted practically, right? You go in front of the promotion boards, you take exams, you do everything you can because you want to get into a position, hopefully because you feel like, hey, you know what, I can make a difference. I can make a positive influence on the agency. I can move us forward. But then when they get into those positions and then they don't want to tell somebody no, or they want to be liked, and so they make decisions based on how people are going to perceive them rather than is it the right thing to do or not. And that can really, really, it'll set you up for failure, and it'll set you up for a career full of stress as well.
So my take on that is um, experiential learning. So there is there is danger, as you well know, in being a police official. Not necessarily physical danger, but danger to your career, your reputation, what other people think, um, what the media is going to say. The higher you go, the more exposed you are to these dangers. And the key to me is you have to overcome those, because if you don't, you'll be a seat warmer in the station. You will not respond to dicey situations. And when your decision making is necessary, one, you don't show, or two, if you have to show, you don't know what to do. So in my career, I recognized this early on as a sergeant. So I wanted to expose myself to as much trouble, difficult situations as possible, so I would be experienced in those. So my first demonstration in front of the State Department, I was a lieutenant. They sent me down there with 80 officers, and there was 5,000 demonstrators there, and they sorted out. You don't think my undies was bunched then? They were. That was my first demonstration. I'm a lieutenant. I'm responsible. I got 80 people. I got to get rid of 5,000 demonstrators in front of the State Department. I did that. I did not like the feeling I was experiencing. So the next demonstration, I volunteered for it, and the third one, I volunteered for it. And by the time I hit my 10th, I felt pretty comfortable for major demonstrations where there could have been violence or civil disobedience. And it was the same thing, whether it was a fatal traffic, industrial accident, suicide, shooting, barricaded subject, domestic. I went to these things so I would learn and feel comfortable about them. That gave me a skill to do the right thing because I have experienced it. I have been there. I immersed myself in it. And I was not apprehensive about handling any type of situation. 15 years deep, I was good to go because I've done a lot of things. Now, what I'm trying to get at here is that experiential learning was critical to me. And this is what happened. So when I was doing those things, I've learned. So when my colleagues would call me on occasion, so if I'm working evenings one night, my colleague would say, hey, Ross, if you're not busy, could you slide over here? I got a barricade. Ross, if the demonstration comes to my location and we start locking people up, can you slide over here? And this happened to me dozens of times. And every time I said, sure. And I went over there. But they had never done that, didn't experience it, and were very apprehensive about how they were going to handle it. Because they avoided these because they were worried about their reputation, what the media was going to say, performance evaluations, and making decisions that could have been second guessed or criticized. So that helped me significantly. And I was the only deputy chief on the DC police that rose through the ranks to that rank on line positions only. They offered me other positions like other people took: communications, data processing, planning and development, um, all these other staff assignments, Saturday and Sunday all day work, Saturday and Sunday off with all day work, I never took. I spent my whole career in patrol or investigative positions all the way up to the top. And that helped me a lot.
Well, it's probably a lot more fun. Um, so here's where I just want to interject with a little bit of technology. I think where technology can help us, and um, I don't, were you still the chief? Did you police at all in the era of body cameras? Were you using body cameras at all? Or did that come after you retired?
Um, we didn't use body cameras, but I was on telephones and YouTube lots of times on demonstrations. And I never fretted. So, do you remember the occupiers?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, so they
Wall
came,
Street. Yep. Yep.
yeah, so they came to DC when I was at the court, and they were coming to the court. They had been all over the place, but they're coming to the Supreme Court. I knew they were coming. I put up bike racks. I had 100 officers on the skirmish line out front. 5,000 of them showed up, and they was game for disturbances in the extreme. They tore the bike racks up. They got in the officers' faces. Uh, Cameras came out, phone cameras. There must have been 20 people doing this whole thing. Okay, so what? Cameras or no cameras, I have to take action, and I did. So they got up in the officers' faces. This wasn't going to work for me because we had the plaza behind us. We could have been surrounded. I'd been in demonstrations like this before. Surrounding is not good. So I broke the line down. We went all the way up to the front of the court at the top of the stairs. They took the plaza, they came up there. Now my back's covered. So we started marching down the stairs. They're taking movies the whole time. We locked up 35 people. It was some violence involved, and I'm doing the right thing. I gave you warnings. I asked you to leave. I'm being as gentle as possible, but you're leaving because you're breaking the law and disturbing operations. So we got them 35 arrests, pushed them off the plaza. Everybody was dispersed. So I'm standing there at the sidewalk, and after it's all over, and one of the demonstrators says, "Damn, I didn't expect that." Well, it was all over YouTube. It was all over YouTube. You can still go on the YouTube and find it and see it. In fact, on my site for my book, I've got the movie of that saying, look, you do the right thing, whether there's movies or no movies, it doesn't make, if you're doing the right thing. Never had any fear about being taped on anything I was doing, ever, because I was doing the right thing. So we didn't have body cameras, but I had plenty of footage from cell phones on YouTube.
Well, so that what you're talking about is just an early form of what I was going to mention in this, just and I know some agencies do this now. We went to body cameras in 2014, and from day one, we put in a process in place where I had an expectation for all of my commanders to do random audits of video. And it wasn't a game of gotcha. It wasn't like going through video trying to find somebody doing something wrong. It was, hey, you can't be on every stop, you can't be on every call, you can't evaluate your officers if you're not there to watch them. And you can only see their performance when you're there with them on calls. So, but regardless, there's video that's there, and so we've got a duty to go back and look at that and see if there's anything that we can learn from this, and if there's anything that we can do to help improve our performance. The video itself becomes really an experiential learning opportunity, an exponential learning tool, because it gives supervisors an opportunity to quickly review cases where they weren't on. And so what I told them was, like, every month at each of our staff meetings, come with 2 videos. Every shift had to come with a minimum of 2 videos, which was show us something that we can learn from, and show us something that where we can exemplify outstanding performance. So we can show everybody else, show the whole department, hey, look how these 2 officers handled this situation. This is textbook. This is just the way we want you to do it. In case you've never been in a situation like this, now we can show you what good performance looks like. On the other hand, if you have an officer that maybe does something that isn't necessarily by the book, or maybe they're outside of policy, maybe they didn't follow the right procedure, then you can learn from it. And the example that I've shared most frequently was the first thing that we really noticed after a few months of watching and evaluating. A lot of these stem from use of force too, but uh, we we noticed a trend in that some of our uses of forces were escalating because we were using ineffective handcuffing techniques. We're not a huge department, but 150 sworn officers. Like our patrol division was, around 100, including the command staff. But we probably saw 20, 30, 40 different handcuffing techniques, and that's generally when things go wrong in an arrest. If you have somebody that's that's thinking about fighting or resisting, then that's if you don't get them into custody quickly and efficiently, it can lead to a fight. So the positive from that was, it wasn't, we didn't go and discipline people because they were using ineffective handcuffing techniques. We brought in all of our defensive tactics instructors and said, take a look at this. What are we doing here? How do we make this better? And that's what we did. We evaluated it. We went back to the drawing board and we retrained. And we did it in our all-day training sessions. We did it in roll calls, and it was effective. And we saw that just a few months down the road, where we weren't seeing those issues with handcuffing as frequently because people were doing it. So I just use that as, it seems like a pretty simple thing, but when you're looking and you critique performance with the understanding and the ideas, we want to improve performance. We're not looking at, and I called it like basically Friday night films. It was like game film. How do we do after the fact? And one of the more interesting things that I found really was some of the examples that my frontline leadership brought to me as what they were indicating as good performance, I had questions about. And so that's where I knew, like, all right, we as a command staff have to do a better job of clearly, articulating our position on, what good performance looks like, what our expectations were, because, we found, you know, we found some things that was like that we didn't, that we didn't anticipate. So again, it's whether it comes from YouTube, whether it comes from First Amendment auditors, that one right now is a pretty it's a pretty I think prime example of where people are not being trained and taught how to effectively negotiate, these provocateurs that come up, and just like the occupiers were, right? That's generally what they were trying to do. They were trying to provoke a certain type of response so they could edit their films the way that was going to project uh, their cause in the most positive light to them, and most likely that for the police, it's usually we're going to portray you in a negative light. But I guess just a long way of saying that there's good opportunities for us to learn. Old school, new school, it's all around us, I think.
Well, I think what you just told me there is very progressive. And I think that there's a lot of utility in what you just told me, but I'm not sure there's that many departments doing what you did. But I can see the value of what you did in improving operations. Uh, the studies I have read on body cams is they're still up in the air about the utility and effectiveness of them, but they did not address it as a progressive tool that you use it as. They use it as far as investigations for excessive force. But I think what you just told me is has a lot of utility and value.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that it was just like this brilliant idea that just came to me out of nowhere, right? But like we talked about on our pre-podcast interview, right? This was something that came to me because I got burned by this, right? We had an example of really poor performance documented on a dash cam, and anyone can see it. I almost even hate to draw attention to it now because I still have a little PTSD from that whole incident as a supervisor. But I had we had a commander engaged in an incident where he pushed a paraplegic out of a wheelchair. It was an unjustified use of force, in my opinion. But the one of the without going into the details of that case, what we found in that process, this was within my first months of being a chief, where I don't even have my feet set yet. And what what I didn't appreciate as a frontline supervisor as a problem in the technology because of the way it might impact the organization. I only viewed it myopically because that it was impacting an officer's efficiency and their ability to do their job throughout, on their shift. And the example is we had a technology problem where the dash cams that we were using were supposed to offload automatically. So when a police car pulled up to a Wi-Fi hotspot in the city, the video was supposed to offload onto a server inside the police department, and then that video could then ultimately be attached if there was, if it was relevant to a case, it could be attached to a case. Well, since the video wasn't offloading, videos from uh, squad cars were stacking up inside the car. Like they were you would have a couple of days worth of video on there, and then there would come a point where the officer would get a message on their camera that says the hard drive is full. So they would go out, they would pull the hard drive out, they'd walk into our civilian technician that handled the video. They'd set the full one in an in tray and grab a blank hard drive, bring it back out, load it up into the car. And so what we had was a systems issue. And we had a technology problem that created a flow issue. And so when we had a use of force, that when that wheelchair incident happened, it just, that video just didn't get attached to the case file. So the supervisors that are evaluating the case don't see the video. I mean, there were other issues that were there, but so for me, it was, I had this trauma that was like, man, when I found out about that case, I found out from a prosecutor. I didn't find out from our own internal system. So I knew, like, we've got a problem with our system. And in addition to a problem with performance. So, they call, there's a lot of different things you can learn from this, but for me, the first thing was we got to fix this. Like, we can't have this happening. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and own what was wrong, and then make the investment to, not only from an evaluation perspective, but also then financially to ensure that, we replace that technology with something that's going to work. And so we don't have that problem again. Um, so yeah, a lot of lessons that we picked up. So when we went to the body cameras, I wasn't as, the technology was working well, but I was very adamant that and we actually even delayed the onboarding of body cameras because they didn't have the back end working yet. And because I had experienced this already, I was like, when you get this technology right, in terms of us being able to do integration with our CAD and our RMS with the body cameras, where I know videos aren't going to get lost, we'll stick with what we're doing. And then, once that technology got to the point where it was working, then we rolled it out. And so day one was, hey, let's make sure that we know if there's a problematic video anywhere in our system, whether it's from a dash cam or a body cam, that that the officer knows, the frontline supervisors know, and all of our management knows that the video is there, because you don't want to find out from somebody outside of your organization that there's a problematic, whether it be a use of force or just any performance issue for that matter. And quite frankly, you don't want to miss opportunities to really capture officers doing great work as well. So yeah, that's where kind of where that came from. But all right, we're coming close up on 90 minutes, and I really wanted to kind of touch on just a couple of things, because there's so much great information um, in your book, and I think oftentimes in policing we we lose sight of some of the easy wins that are right in front of us, and we overcomplicate things. But from your book, the core, and this is just me, but the core message from ethics-based policing is really emphasizing the importance and integrity uh, of integrity, really, and ethics in policing. So you talk about seven building blocks. I'm not going to put you on the spot and say outline all seven building blocks for me, but thinking just maybe broadly in terms of those building blocks, when you're talking about creating a culture of accountability, grounded in accountability. I think that what I was just doing there was an example of using the video as an accountability tool. What do you think that from those? What do you think we're doing well in policing today, and maybe what are some of the things that we should revisit, if if you were speaking to a young chief or even a young supervisor today? I know that's a
Well,
big question. I'm sorry.
yeah, it is. I'm a firm believer in ethics-based policing. It's tried, true, tested, valid, and reliable. So you talked about first line supervisors. So in my experience, there's several different kinds. There's laissez-faire sergeant. He doesn't do anything. His squad runs rampant. He doesn't hold anybody accountable. Then there's Mr. Popularity. He wants to be everybody's friend. So he doesn't hold anybody accountable unless somebody holds his feet to the fire and forces him to do that. And then there's the integrity-based official. He's the best one for any department. The officer knows where he's coming from. He's predictable. He holds people accountable. He rewards them. There's no question about what kind of supervisor he is. He controls and holds people accountable. So he takes on his responsibility. Two keys: responsibility for the first line supervisors and mid-level managers to hold subordinates accountable. Accountable in two ways: accountable for misdeeds and rewards and recognitions for good work. So if we have lots of integrity-based sergeants, corporals, and lieutenants, everything is great and moves forward. Operations improve. It's contagious within the unit. The public is satisfied and sees sea changes and how officers perform in front of them because they're being instilled in a culture that's service and protection based for the public. And there's a esprit de corps built. So all these things combined through that one integrity-based official, sergeant or lieutenant, transfers all the way down and changes operations effectively for the betterment for the public, improvement of the officers, and for the department's reputation. So that's my whole thing that I know works, and it does. And you know how I know it works. So the story goes like this. When I was teaching at Hopkins, a professor came to me in 1999 and said, "Did you hear about the ethics-based, the integrity of police officer conference that Janet Reno, Bill Clinton's attorney general, is having in D.C. for 3 days? National Symposium on Police Integrity." I said, "No, I didn't hear about that. And I would really like to go." So he hooked me up with the coordinator. I said, "I'd like to come down." He says, "Yeah, come on down. I'll have a place for you. We'll reserve a seat. And that would be great." I said, "How many cops you got talking?" And he said, "None." I said, "Okay, so who's talking?" They had powerhouses in the academic field. Those are the experts. So I said, "Yeah, I'd like to hear that." So I'll go down there. I go down there Sunday morning, pull the brochure, start to read it. Sunday morning says Monday, 2 p.m. Ross Swope, keynote speaker. How did this happen? So I go to the coordinator. I grab him by the lapel. What are you doing? He says, there's no cops talking. You got your chance. So I took off out of there like a scalded dog and went up to the station and started banging out my theory of what I've been doing for these past years. It made it effective. And I gave my speech. I get this. Sit down and shut up. Not literally, but figuratively. So I did. So a year later, Rampart Division in LAPD goes nuclear.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it goes nuclear. It's national news for a week. 6 months after that, I get a call from LAPD assistant chief and said, Ross, we just want to put you on notice. I said, uh-oh, what did I do now? And he said, we wanted to let you know that we finished a Rampart Division corruption report and you're featured prominently in it. And I said, well, how did I get in there? So he said, we got Janet Reno's book. She published every speech that was in there. One speech, your ethics-based policing was what we found what was wrong in LAPD, precisely and right on the money. We were doing everything wrong that you identified. And that validated me in a big way because here's LAPD. They agreed with what I said. They instituted it, changed everything. And what I had outlined back in 1999 in that speech is the same thing I'm outlining right now. And it works. LAPD saw it. They recognize it. Other departments have. So that's how it is.
You know, that's really, that's classic, first and foremost. Nothing like walking yourself into it, right?
Oh, yeah. I got hammered.
But you know what? That's what happens when some people call that luck, right? That's when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
And you were definitely prepared for the moment. Um, and when you boil that down, like going back to what you were saying about the types of leaders and like the laissez-faire and those that want to be liked, um, it's uh, when I mentioned earlier that when we're training or when we're training young supervisors or we're selecting young supervisors, um, selecting for the right characteristics and the right traits, I think is critical. And you mentioned in your book, and I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head, but you had spoken with somebody. I wish I had the notes written down. I'm just going from my memory here, but a professor from Minnesota, somewhere in Minnesota, where he was talking about how when you're selecting for officers themselves, how you can, there are techniques that you can and tools that you can use to ensure that you're selecting ethical based, personalities and people that are going to come into the profession with the right character traits. But then when you get, I just think those things are amplified when you get into a leadership position. And yeah, like the worst thing that can happen is, for any organization is to have a frontline leader that doesn't take that responsibility on themselves to make sure that the message, number one, that when policy is and programs and everything is being communicated from your administration, it's your job to understand and know what's expected of you, and to be able to, and if the environment's right, you can question it. Like, hey, I don't understand. Please clarify for me what my role is in this, because once you're out on the streets and you're that frontline supervisor, it's all on you at that point. And it can't be when there's an unpopular policy or decision that's been made. You can't stand in front of the troops and say, well, we're doing this because the chief said so, and I don't agree with it, but we're going to do it anyway. If you don't agree with it, you need to disagree with it, in those moments when you're having those discussions with your superiors, because really all you do in those moments, if you when you say that, you cut yourself off at the knees and you discredit your own authority, because really what you're telling your people is, um, yeah, well, we'll do this just because we have to, but not because I want you to do it. And then when those supervisors have a plan or a program or an idea that they want to institute, and people question them or challenge them on it, they'll get upset and say, well, I'm telling you because I said so. This is what we're doing. Um, so that was always something I always tried to make sure that, you know, our in our staff meetings is like, hey, if you got questions, ask. This is the time to ask. And a lot of times, supervisors don't. They walk out and they don't question, whether it's because they don't want to get, challenged by their peers, or they don't want to, appear like they don't understand in front of their peers. And so yeah, that's a constant struggle for, I think, any organization, is making sure, and I guess that boils down to communication, but
I got two examples of that.
yeah, let's hear them.
So this was quite a few years ago, but it was made big time news in D.C. metropolitan area. There was a civil suit involving a county police department. Uh, the officer, a canine man, comes across two homeless people, and a sergeant shows up with him. And I don't know exactly what they were doing, but there wasn't any uh, immediate threat on either side. The officer turns to the sergeant and said, "Can I turn the dog loose?" And the sergeant says yes. Now, one, why would the officer even ask a sergeant something like that? And two, why would the sergeant say yes? So it was a multi-million-dollar civil settlement because the officer wanted the dog to get a bite, and the sergeant said okay, and they were homeless. And that was the culture that sergeant created, and the officer felt comfortable doing that and asking him, and he got permission. That's bad. You talked about,
Yeah, that's really bad. And that's
yeah,
another thing that gives me, I have a little PTS as a chief.
yeah,
I think almost all my major litigation was from canine cases.
yeah.
So
So the other thing that you talked about was officials saying it's not my decision, it's the chief's. Well, when I took over the court, there was no formal promotional process. I wanted to be fair, honest, and straightforward and try to get the most skilled, dedicated people. So I asked for volunteers, corporals, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. This is what we're going to do. We're going to create a formal promotional process. And here's some guidelines. So things you might want to consider is written test, oral exam, longevity, education, and performance evaluations. Whatever weights you want to do, however you think is going to work best. So this group put this plan together with those minor guidelines. We were all for it. They liked it. I liked it. I publish it as a special order for the upcoming promotional exam. These are things that you're going to be graded on, and these are the weights each one of them is given. So a sergeant and a lieutenant who were on this committee, who wrote this thing, goes to roll call the very next day and says, well, here's the new policy and procedure on the promotional process. It's not from us, it's from the chief of police. And I don't know whether we agree with it, but there it is. I lost my mind. What? You were on there, you wrote this and said it's not your work, it's from the chief of police. So they did not fare very well.
that's hilarious.
Can you believe I just
Oh, I
couldn't
can believe it. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
couldn't. This is the sergeant lieutenant. What else
That's
do you want me to do?
Yeah, that's the classic.
Oh
That's
my
a,
God.
I'll give one more story, and then I have one more question I want to ask before we wrap it up for today, because I'm already thinking about part two.
All
But
right.
um, you know, here's what I learned. And again, I had some great mentors, and I learned a lot. But there's some things that I actually just made minor tweaks and changes on, and So one of the things, anything that that involved formal discipline that came to the level of the chief's office. Obviously, I wanted to see all discipline. I wanted to know what was going on everywhere, but I didn't weigh in on shift level stuff unless I saw that there was probably a deficiency somewhere with a frontline supervisor. And then even then I would talk to the lieutenant or their captain about it, and try to work it that way, just so I respected the chain of command. Because if I didn't respect the chain of command, then I couldn't expect them to either. But in our meetings, what I found after a couple of, not serious disciplinary issues, but word comes back to you, especially I wasn't in a huge department. And so I had a lot of relationships. So I would get these comments, people would make them jokingly or snidely or whatever in the, where I would like, wait, what did you hear? And I'm like, well, that's not what happened. In my mind, I would be thinking, so now it's just like you start tracing things back. So ultimately, and this is just, and I've shared this example with other chiefs that I've talked with over the years. But what I did was, and this is what I learned in, I did, if there was something that was major, I need to know, I wanted all the facts and circumstances, what we knew as soon as I could get them. But I also didn't want to interrupt or disrupt the investigative process either. So I didn't want to insert myself anywhere where somebody might get the impression that, oh, well, the chief wants this or the chief wants that. I would stay out of it and get the information that I needed. And then once it came to me, I would make sure that the investigation was complete. Once, whether it was shift level or internal affairs level, it would, I would have the frontline supervisor would make a disciplinary recommendation, and their lieutenant would read it, and they would basically sign off that I've read the report, I've read the investigation, and I agree with my sergeant's recommendation. Where I disagree, and this is why. And then the captain would do the same thing. And so by the time it came to the deputy chief and I, they had done their vetting, and then if it was serious enough, then they would present that to us. But I always just waited until I was, until the end. I let everybody else weigh in, because I found early that if I didn't do that, then people would just sit back and wait to hear what I had to say. And then, that could influence, what they might think or what they recommend. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted what they really felt, what they really thought. And because, I'm only one person with one set of eyes and one set of ears and one set of, opinions. And in the end, I'm going to be the one that's held accountable to the decision that's made. But I just want to make sure I'm making those decisions with all of, where I've got everybody's true and heartfelt expression about what they truly believe. Some things are always pretty clear and plain just based on policy and law, but other things. But when it came time to reading, and giving that discipline to the officers, I I would just read straight from the report. They had a copy of it, I had a copy of it, and I would just tell them, hey, look, this is not I know you can read. I know you're you're a smart, intelligent officer. I'm just going to read this because at the end, I want you to tell me if this is accurate, if there's anything that you agree with or anything that you disagree with, and we'll address it then. So I would read through it, and then I would say, this is what your frontline supervisor recommends. Your lieutenant has agreed or disagreed. This is why, and this is what the captain's decision was, and we either agree or disagree. But at the end of that, when we were done, that officer knew, and we would all be sitting at the table with them too. They would know exactly what we did and why we did it, and there's no one at that table that's gonna walk out of that room later and say, well, the chief said, or it was, we were all on board, and we used the same process, and the process was fair, and so the officers could walk out of there knowing that the process was fair. And because what I didn't want to have happen was, as soon as we walk out of the room, you have the sergeant that says, yeah, well, I really only wanted you to have a 1 day, but the chief, he was adamant that you were getting 5 days and unpaid or what. Uh, so I don't know whether that's it worked for me. It worked for our organization, and I felt like, even the officers, even though they may not want to go back to their shifts and to their peers and admit that, hey, this is the way it was. I knew that we did everything within, I think, within our ability to make sure that we were coming to fair decisions, and that we were doing the right things, and we were, number one, always, it wasn't punitive. It was always corrective, right? I'm not here to punish anybody. I'm here to make sure that you understand, the expectations, what the performance we're looking for is, and what's not acceptable. And and when generally when we walked out of there, I told him, I was like, from this point forward, I think we're done. I'm not going to bring this up unless you have any more questions about it. So if you've got anything to say about it, say it right now while we're here, and let's discuss it. Other than that, it's it's a done deal. It's closed out. So I don't know if you have any comments on that process or not.
No,
That was a little.
we had a similar process in D.C., and it was called a commander's conference, and a commander wouldn't have to send anything downtown, but he could suspend somebody for up to 15 days. And I've had disciplinary action. It was commander's conference. I was a commander. The officer would come in, had read the investigation. It was thorough, truthful. I had a lot of confidence in it, but they always had union representatives with them.
Yep.
And I built a trusting relationship, even with the union representatives and with the officers. And we'd sit down and discuss it. And they had read the investigation. I explained it to them. And the vast majority of the time, we came to an understanding. Yes, they messed up. Yes, this is the consequences. And this, this is what I found. And nobody left mad. Nobody left like they were getting shortchanged or being hurt deliberately, or it was something vindictive. There's discipline. You violate rules, there's consequences, and you knew that. And I understand. And I gave them what was fair. They accepted it. And there was no really grumbling after the fact. Everybody knew where I was coming from. It was open. It was transparent. There was no issue with it. And what you did sounds like the similar thing that I did. And it was effective in dealing with subordinates and severe disciplinary actions for me and for you.
Yeah, and the learning part for me there was, if you have a strong personality in the room, it can shut down, discourse and discussion, and then that just doesn't get you where you need to be, and it doesn't lend to trust in the process. So, yeah. All right.
The key is this: you have it, I have it. People had confidence in it. They knew us. We were straight up. We were open. There was no issues about where we were coming from. Everybody understood you. Everybody understood me. We were fair, honest, and forthright. That works. It's ethics-based policing at the top level.
So to close it out for today, and then we'll think about part two. But the last question really I had is really just, and maybe it's just more of an observation. You can comment it, but you mentioned in your book, you talk about public perception, but how how do you think improving ethical standards within police departments can help restore public confidence in our police departments today? I do feel like the latter, the pendulum is kind of swinging back, and people are, and again, according to Gallup and other polls, people have never really lost a lot of trust in the police, where they've lost a lot in the media and have rarely ever shown any for politicians. But for the most part, people do trust the police. Sometimes that sways a little bit, but maybe just, it's a quick comment on how you think ensuring your standards, your ethical standards inside your agency is going to set you up for success in your community.
I sort of have a different take, and I haven't watched or looked at any polls, but to me, in my travels, there's still a significant gap between the connections between some of the public,
Right. Yeah, maybe that's a better way to put it.
some of the
Right.
public and some of the police officers. They don't feel like I don't feel like the connection between the officers and the community is as strong and open as it was a decade and a half ago. Um, there's just a separation there. And there's not necessarily obvious animosity between the two groups, but it's not like it was. And my take is it's because the connection is not there. There's the judgment, discretion that officers are using that is just they're different from a time before. There's not the connection there. There's not the personal connection. I think some officers are seeing this as just a job. And the community sees them as they're just there to be there. So I want the officers to feel like it's not just a job. They go to work their 8 hours and go home, and it's just a job. It's not something that's a career. It's something that you put your heart in and you understand the people that you are serving and protecting need you, and want you there to use good judgment and discretion. So if we use ethics-based policing and get back to this judgment and discretion when they're exercising that in all their community interactions with the public, it's going to improve because they're making better decisions and better judgment. I want to build that into them. So when there is any interaction, whether it be a traffic stop, missing child, disorderly, anything, they're using good judgment. These are people we're dealing with. They're not the enemy. They're not some distant environment we're working in. You're there every day. You do the best you can with what you got. But if you use good discretion and good judgment, things change. And the community sees this sea change and things improve. And all of a sudden, those connections are back and they're strong. And police officers are doing better, the community is doing better, and it's all good for everybody.
Yeah, I love it. And and I think maybe the best way to summarize it was I know you mentioned it in your book, and I've heard this time and time again throughout a lot of different trainings that I've been to over the years, and just quite frankly, just the very simple message it boils down to is, treat others the way you would want to be treated, and when you respond to a call, respond to it and handle it as if that were your family, what your son, your daughter, your dad, your mom, your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother, your grandfather, like how would you want the police to treat them? And that should be really the one guiding principle that guides, I think, every officer on every call that they're on. If assuming that someone comes from a good, you've got the right officer to begin with, right? Because I've seen some people treat their family pretty poorly, but if we got the right ones, right, we can trust that they're going to follow that golden rule.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're up on our time limit here, but I really do appreciate you spending this time with me, and I already have a million questions for what I didn't even get to today. But Ross Swope, ethics-based policing. Is there where can people find you and get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your work and your writings in the past, and maybe trainings and things that you can offer still today?
Well, my Amazon best-selling book is on Amazon, so you can pick it up there. And I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and my website, Ross Swope Author.
Ross Swope, author. All right.
Yeah.
Well, normally what I like to do is hold up a copy of the book, but if I were going to do that today, I'd have to hold up my Kindle.
Oh, I don't even know if I've got one here. Oh, I do.
Let's see it. Let's show everybody the book
All
cover,
right.
because uh, there it is. Uh, right in front of the Supreme Court. And that's what I wanted to get into the next time. And, just for our audience, so today, this episode will be broadcast in a couple weeks, but this past weekend there was an attempted assassination on former President Trump. And I really, really wanted to talk to you about some of those issues, but like I said at the beginning before we went on air, I'm going to take my own advice and wait just probably another 2 or 3 days before I actually dig into this and try to learn anything, because I just don't think we know anything yet. So maybe we'll make that part 2.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
And you might not even want to share anything on that, so I'll leave it at that. But again, thank you for spending your valuable time with us. And until our next episode, we'll be 1042.